Hello everyone, I'm Smita Sharma. Within a fortnight of the new Narendra Modi government coming to power, we've seen active engagement between India and China. First, that telephonic conversation between the two prime ministers, and then a structured dialogue at the level of foreign ministers. I'm joined here today for an exclusive conversation by the Chinese foreign minister who has just wrapped up his India tour as the special envoy to Chinese President Mr. Xi Jinping as well. Mr. Wang Yi, ni hao.
Ni hao.
Thank you so much for speaking to Network 18. Well, you met with Mr. Narendra Modi, and China has dealt with Mr. Narendra Modi, the chief minister. What is your impression of Mr. Narendra Modi, the prime minister?
我今天第一次见到他，但是早有风闻。
Well, indeed, it is the first time for me to meet Prime Minister Modi, and before that, I have heard a lot about him because he's been to China on many occasions, and he's already an old friend of China's. My overall biggest impression is that he is a person that acts very swiftly to get things done. He has a strong desire of boosting the national economy and reinvigorating India. He is a man filled with energy. Actually, I discussed a lot with him on how to strengthen China-India relationship. We had very good discussions. And I think he's an outstanding leader of India who acts with a down-to-earth manner and who can also adopt a broad vision. I'm confident that under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, the Indian government will lead the Indian people on an already very good basis of achievement. And as your largest neighbor, China will stand by your side in this process.
So, would you think then that Mr. Narendra Modi, given his decisive mandate, will be in a stronger position to perhaps take stronger political decisions when it comes to relationship with China compared to the previous UPA regime and Dr. Manmohan Singh?
我不能介入到你们的内政。
I'm not going to intervene in your internal affairs. I can only say that achievements in our bilateral relations are attributable to the successive leaders of our two countries. And for the Indian side, the leaders from both the INC and the BJP. At the same time, we also have a lot of expectations on the new Indian leadership. So we actually have a lot of areas to cooperation, and in these areas we have huge potential and untapped ones in particular. And now the important thing for us is to sit down, face those questions, address those questions, roll up our sleeves and get things done.
So you said you have great expectations now from the new government as well. Are there any specific expectations that you conveyed to Mrs. Sushma Swaraj in those conversations that lasted for almost 3 hours that China has from India? Some specific expectations?
我们希望中印两个大国，我们可以。
It is our hope that China and India could work together to build connections between our development concepts, development strategies, and development advantages, and to fuel our respective growth engines. For example, I will give you one figure: our bilateral trade, $65 billion US. If you compare it with the 4 trillion trade volume of China as a whole and 800 billion trade volume of the Indian side, that is indeed too small a number, and it is extremely incommensurate with the scale and potential of our two markets as well as the needs of our two peoples. So we need to find more spaces and tap this potential.
Right, but having said that, when you talk of cooperation between India and China, perhaps growth can be accelerated if you can take care of the boundary disputes. Is it possible for India and China really to think of a scheduled time frame within which the boundary issue can be resolved? Are you looking at a possible time frame out here?
边境问题是西方殖民者遗留给我们的问题。
Well, after more than 10 years of efforts, we have already identified the political parameters and guiding principles for the settlement of the boundary question. Now we are entering phase 2, a phase based on which we are discussing settlement framework. We stand ready to work closely with the Indian side to accelerate relevant negotiations and to find a fair and reasonable as well as mutually acceptable solution to all at an early date. But let me add one more thing. Boundary question is not China-India relationship is all about. we must put this specific question in the whole picture of China-India cooperation. And our leaders have reached a very important agreement. First, we must work together to uphold peace and tranquility in the border area, and secondly, we should not allow the boundary question to affect the normal development of our bilateral ties. With more progress made in our bilateral ties and with deepened mutual trust, we will be able to create a better environment for the settlement of the boundary question.
创造更好的条件。
But having said that, the kind of incident that we saw in Depsang last year, there was a 21-day standoff between the two armies. What are the chances that a similar situation could be there in future again? And there is a lot of apprehension in India about the defense mechanisms being built along the line of actual control by China. That is something that a large section of Indians seem to be worried about.
首先，这是我们这种事件发生是我们不愿意看到的。
First, this incident is not what we want to see. Second, we must try our best to prevent a reoccurrence of such incident. Well, thirdly, once this incident, which neither of us want to see, occurs, we must timely address these issues through consultations at all levels.
友好的商谈。
One of the mechanisms is, of course, that meeting of the special representatives on boundary talks. Has the Indian Prime Minister conveyed to you that the new National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, will continue to be the special representative? When can we expect a meeting between the two special representatives next?
我现在还没有得到这方面的
I have not yet got the specific information about the new SR from the Indian side, but I'm confident that the Prime Minister will very soon appoint a new SR. I wish to tell you that we have already signed between us a border defense cooperation agreement, so we do have very much improved mechanisms at all levels relating to the boundary question.
But you know, India and China still have that historical baggage of 1962. There is perhaps a large section here that has suspicion. Is it a possibility that the two countries can go to war again? You know, they look at China, they look at China's rise, they are awed by it, and they are also very apprehensive about the rise, thinking perhaps China might strike at India again.
中国的崛起是和平力量的崛起。
The rise of China represents the rise of the power for peace, and the rise of India also means the rise of the power for peace. So the collective rise of China and India and closer cooperation between our two countries will make this world more peaceful and balanced. We have a strategic and a cooperative partnership, and we are also long-term partners for strategic cooperation. Between us, there will only be cooperation. There will not be a repetition of what happened in the past.
That's very encouraging to hear, and in fact, the big focus of the relationship seems to be economic ties. The new government's focus is about infrastructure building. They're talking about roads, ports, railways. We might have FDI coming into railways. Is that an area where China would also like to increase its stake of investments like the Japanese here in India?
我今天跟莫迪总理讲，要把两国的发展优势结合起来。
I discussed with Prime Minister Modi this afternoon that we should build connections between our respective development advantages or strengths. China's high-speed rail is the longest in the world, with a total of 11,000 kilometers. The Chinese high rail sector has been quite competitive in terms of its technologies, equipment, operations, and management expertise. And given a fair competition environment, we are not afraid of competing with anyone else in the world. So we are both willing and ready to seek mutually beneficial cooperation with the Indian side in the railway sector.
有意愿。
And are there specific proposals given from New Delhi as to how the trade imbalance could be corrected by China?
我们一直在讨论这个。
Well, this is a question under discussion. We do have an agreement, which is that we will not reduce our overall trade in order to alleviate the imbalance. On the contrary, we will continue to expand our trade and to achieve healthy and balanced growth of trade in the process of expansion. And now we are trying our best to provide more facilitations in terms of mutual trade. And for the next stage, I think we should be bold enough and be determined to discuss the possibility of establishing bilateral free trade arrangements. That, I think, is in the fundamental and long-term interests of our two peoples.
Well, while you're talking of economic cooperation, one of the sticking points in the relationship has been China's policy of issuing stapled visas to people from Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh. Why really do you have to follow that policy?
这是一个具体的问题。
Well, this isn't a specific issue. Indeed, in the eastern section of China-India border, there are areas where there are disputes. This is a fact. So in order to respond to the need of traveling by people in that particular region, the Chinese side has resorted to stapled visa as a gesture of goodwill and as a gesture of flexibility. So this is in order to facilitate their travels. Well, this practice has been going on for many years. It did not start yesterday. Of course, we can continue our discussions on this specific issue through our consular consultations.
But because of this policy itself, we have even seen defense exercises being called off in the recent past between the two countries. It clearly is an issue that makes the New Delhi government uncomfortable out here. And there are opposition voices that say, why don't you reciprocate? Why don't you also issue staple visas to countries that have a dispute as far as its territories are concerned with China?
跟14个国家有陆地接壤，我们已经跟12个
Well, there are 14 countries that have land borders with China, and China have completed negotiations on border demarcation with 12 out of them, and the remaining two are India and Bhutan. Well, to approach this issue, we should adopt a proactive approach instead of putting it in a negative light. We should try our best to create conditions so that this issue could be addressed as early as possible.
So are you willing to take a relook at this policy if New Delhi does not want you to continue with it?
我们需要在不影响两国各自在边界问题上的立场。
Well, I think between us, we must find approach that provides facilities to the travels of the local people and that are acceptable to both countries without compromising our respective positions on the boundary question. And the stapled visa is a gesture of flexibility as far as we are concerned. Well, I'll give you an example. Some Chinese engineering expertise have been trying to apply visa to come to India to involve in relevant projects, and they have been waiting for over half a year without getting such a visa, so they cannot continue their work. Well, I'm not complaining to anyone, but this is an area that I think both of us should work to improve.
完全跟我们的
So, well, of course, you've stressed that there has to be a greater visa liberalization between the two countries. The other area of cooperation seems to be counterterrorism. The Pakistani Army Chief General Rahil Sharif was recently in Beijing on one of his first visits. Pakistan-China called each other all-weather friends. Does New Delhi expect Beijing to play maybe a greater influence when it comes to asking the Pakistan government to really act more on terrorists that act against Indian interests from its soil?
中国也是恐怖主义的受害者，印度同样也是，巴基斯坦也是。
Well, terrorism is a common enemy of the mankind. China is a victim of terrorism, so is India and Pakistan. Indeed, our three countries need to work together to fight against terror. Pakistani side has already made it clear to China that they will firmly fight against terror. We are also ready to have closer cooperation with India on counterterrorism. Well, since our three countries have the common target, we can enhance dialogue and coordination to reduce misunderstanding. This serves the interests of all of our three countries. We hope to see improved relationship between India and Pakistan because both of you are good friends of China's.
But does India need to worry about these reports of Chinese collaboration with Pakistan in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir? There are several reports that keep coming in that about there's a presence of Chinese engineers or Chinese soldiers in Pakistani-held Kashmir.
中国现在我们的工程技术
Well, China has an objective position on the issue of Kashmir. Chinese engineers and workers could almost be found in every country, every region, and every corners of the world. Some of them are involved in the engineering projects in the Kashmir region. Some reports suggested that some military personnel have been involved. I don't think that is a fact. Probably some workers from China have bought some uniforms that are similar to those of soldiers from shops. But I can tell you very clearly that they are not soldiers.
We'll have to take a short break out here. This exclusive conversation will, of course, continue on the other side of the break, where we will discuss about the other hyphenated relationships with other world powers as well, and their possible impact on Sino-India ties and cultural diplomacy, if that could play a stronger role between the two countries. Right away after the short break. Welcome back. We are in an exclusive conversation with the Chinese Foreign Minister, Mr. Wang Yi, who was in India as the special envoy to the President, Mr. Xi Jinping. Mr. Wang Yi, your Foreign Ministry spokesperson recently gave a comment saying that India need not be too worried about what is happening in South China Sea. But it is also of concern to New Delhi because that would adversely affect half of India's trade that passes through this route if in case this controversy were to flare up.
我要告诉你，首先，
First, I wish to tell you that in the South China Sea, freedom of international navigation is not a problem. Well, secondly, the overall situation in the South China Sea is stable and peaceful. Thirdly, we are ready to continue to have consultations and negotiations on an equal footing to find a solution.
So you don't think that your differences with countries like Japan or Vietnam in South China Sea or East China Sea could force New Delhi to take up certain positions, be pushed against the wall? That will not be a difficult place for New Delhi to be in.
争议的海域单方面打紧打，
Well, as long as the Japanese side and the Vietnamese side refrain from taking any unilateral provocations against China, the situation will calm down.
But is there any assurance then that the situation will not flare up further, but there will be dialogue to settle the issue?
当然我要告诉你，
So we are, of course, ready to address those tensions in certain areas through bilateral discussion. But let me make it clear, it takes two to tango. So this is not something China could accomplish by its own will. We need two countries to work together.
不乱。
Let's hope that there is more jaw instead of war. And this is, in fact, you said that it takes two to tango. This is an era of interconnected relationships. Your premier, Mr. Li Keqiang, he chose India as his first overseas destination. But Mr. Narendra Modi is headed to Bhutan first, and from there he is headed to Japan. Is China disappointed that China is not his first destination overseas?
这个我想
China-India relations has a strong base. We have mutual trust. We have already been impressed by how much importance the Prime Minister Modi attaches to China. But if both the media and the people of India believe that Prime Minister Modi should come to earlier as soon as possible, we would welcome it wholeheartedly.
Did you get any assurance from him that he will visit China this year itself within maybe the next 2 months?
我想中印关系是一个长久的关系。
China-India relations is a long-term relationship, and we will maintain the momentum of high-level exchanges.
But does it worry you that there are these theories that America seeks closer ties with India to, in a way, counterbalance the rise of China? And Narendra Modi is very good friends at a personal level with Mr. Shinzo Abe. So, the increasing warm ties between America and India or India and Japan, does that worry China?
坚定的奉行。
Indian government advocates an independent foreign policy. And also India gives priority to its relationship with China. It is only natural for us to strengthen exchanges, build mutual trust, and expand cooperation. This serves the interests of both of us. An important thing is that China-India friendship should enjoy the strong support of our two peoples, including the media.
This is the last two questions because you speak of mutual trust. How much of an issue really is for China when it comes to the issue of Tibet, the presence of Dalai Lama in India, because we saw Mr. Sangye attend Mr. Narendra Modi's swearing-in ceremony. Does that worry, does that bother China? Is that an issue that stops mutual trust from further increasing?
我想这也是一个为邻之道
For
吧。
Tibet-related issues, indeed a major concern of the Chinese side. We of course hope that India would properly handle this issue. I also think this is something that neighbors should do to each other. Neighbors should accommodate each other's concerns. Well, you probably remember that under the prime ministership of former Prime Minister Vajpayee, I was involved in discussions and consultations with the former National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Vajpayee during his visit to China in order to strengthen our cooperation. And in a joint statement at the end of his visit to China, the Indian side pledged explicitly that it recognizes Tibet Autonomous Region being part of the territory of the People's Republic of China. This position has been reaffirmed by Prime Minister Modi. This is a consistent policy of the Indian government, and we hope and we are confident that Prime Minister Modi will continue to carry out this policy.
But the Americans seem to suggest that you should have an unconditional dialogue with Dalai Lama. Is that a possibility for China?
I think the United States should tell the Dalai Lama that asking it to give up any attempt to seek Tibetan independence, or if the United States is indeed interested in this issue.
Right. Finally, before we end, I was in Beijing last year and I met a couple of young students, university students, who were very, very fascinated with Bollywood movies. Do you think Hindi cinema can play a greater cultural role in bridging the gap? And can more Bollywood movies be screened in Beijing?
当年的大篷车还是大概20-30年前。
Now, films from Bollywood is also very much popular in China. I think these movies have vividly shown the bright side of the civilizations and the cultures of India. And I hope to see more Chinese movies come into India. And I think this is an indispensable part in our effort to rejuvenate the Asia as a whole, and we should work together indeed.
Of course, as ancient civilizations, India and China have a lot to learn from each other, but it remains to be seen if the new Narendra Modi government can give a greater political push to mutual ties. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. News and updates continue on CNN IBN. For now, goodbye from the entire team here.